With a number of COVID-19 cases on the rise throughout the state of Texas, there have been more and more questions regarding the upcoming school year. While we still don't have all the answers, we'll be publishing episodes weekly to provide what information we do have and keep you updated on the 2021 school year. I am Andrew Kim, Superintendent of Comal Independent School District. Joining me today is our Executive Director of Safety and Support, Joe McKenna, and also our Executive Director of Communications and Governmental Relations, Steve Stanford. This week's topic, guys, that we're going to be talking about is general health guidelines that's been issued out. A little bit more detail. So what is the life of a student in an on-campus situation from morning to end from a health perspective? I think parents have a lot of questions about that and students as well. And then we're going to be talking about information related to sort of this pre-commit selection of on-campus versus remote learning in terms of what scenarios that we're anticipating as a school district. So two major topics for discussion today. So with that in mind, I'm jump right into Joe. Joe, I'm glad you're joining me today again. I appreciate it very much.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So Joe, by the way, it's okay to call you Joe, right?
Oh, it is.
It's Dr. McKenna, but I've been calling him Joe quite a bit. So Joe, in all seriousness, the health guidelines came out from the Texas Education Agency, and rather they're somewhat very broad and open to us having regular normal school year without much restrictions. So kind of tell us a little bit more about that from your perspective. What's your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I think, in line with some of our guiding principles that we've begun to share out, we want to have school as normal as possible. And I think when we say normal, we have to talk about the same types of activities. They may look different, right? But we want to get, again, kids back in our buildings, learning in our classrooms, having lunch in our cafeteria. So I think the guidelines, now that we've had some time to dig into them and look at them, they do allow us to do that, but also put, I think, a reasonable set of expectations in place so parents have some confidence that when I send my kid to school, that they're going to be healthy, they're going to be safe, and they're going to be able to engage in some of those normal activities. Yeah. So I think, again, on first look, and as we kind of get into putting these in place, they're going to allow us to do that, to get back to normal and make sure that your kids are health and safety.
And really, these guidelines are really not only for kids, students, but also for teachers and adults in the building too, because we've got to worry about both groups of people that are coming together here starting August 25th, at least in the Comal Independent School District. So tell me, let's kind of review that a little bit, because in detail, what does a child's day from getting up in the morning for an on-campus kid who decides to say, hey, I want to come back to school because I miss my kids, I miss my teachers. Sure. And certainly, learning face-to-face on campus is a better way to go from an instructional sense.
Sure.
So what does that look like for a kid?
Sure. So I think one of the main things you're going to see when you arrive at school that morning or on your way to school that morning, we're going to ask you to complete a health screener. And this goes kind of into our guiding principle of ownership of wellness. It's that last check before you come into the building that I'm feeling well. And this, again, is really to keep our buildings open and keep our kids coming to school to make sure that we're all healthy that morning and we're all coming in. We're not exhibiting any symptoms or had any contact that could potentially, force us to have to close a school down or send certain kids home. So that's going to be your first kind of check.
And the screener is a sort of and we're working on that right now to provide to all of our parents.
Yeah, it's going to be an app-based process that we think is going to be pretty seamless and easy to use. You pull it up, you answer a few questions, you submit it, and then
really, there's only two questions. Right?
That's really it. You experiencing any of these symptoms? And we've kind of gotten that guidance from TEA in terms of what those symptoms are. And have you had contact with anyone that has been confirmed positive? And so that's going to be the first thing that, you kind of do in the morning. And it's going to be something that we certainly have to make a routine. When you come into the building, you're going to see things like hand sanitizer stations. You're going to see the custodial teams on each of the campuses wiping down surfaces that are commonly touched, perhaps in common areas. You're just going to see some of those things. Drop off and pick up may look slightly different to try to reduce some of the large gatherings that may happen outside or inside of the building. So operationally, it's going to look perhaps a little different, but the activities that we're going to be engaging in are the same things that we've always done.
Okay. And, just to kind of go back to that app situation, which will be made available to all parents, The data on that is private. I mean, this is not going to be shared with anybody in that information wise.
Nope. And I think that's one of the reasons you saw pretty clear in the state guidance that says, you can't ask about these individual symptoms. You ask, do you have any of these? Yes or no.
Right.
And then, we destroy that data. Once we don't need it anymore, once we've determined that you're healthy enough to come into the building and for school that day, the data goes away.
And in some sense, this really truly follows along with our guiding principle about ownership of wellness, the guiding principle number 2 for us as a school district, because we need everybody to own this. We need everybody to cooperate and take ownership of their own health situations in many ways. Now, I think a lot of people want to know, once you get in the building, then is there going to be cleaning going on between classes, and how's that going to work?
Yeah, so certainly we're going to, again, going back to ownership of wellness, our custodial teams are going to be out there, but, certainly in our classrooms, we want to educate our teachers, our staff, our kids to be able to, perhaps wipe down their desk when they're done, maybe wipe things off as they're putting them away if they're shared supplies. Again, it's that everyone has a piece of this to make sure, again, that we can return to some sense of normalcy and have school the way that we're used to having it. But everyone's going to have a piece in making sure that, that we stay healthy.
Now, just to correct, though, we've been talking about not having really a shared supplies, really.
No, we're going to minimize that quite a bit. Are there certain things that are going to have to be shared because they're, a certain object? But that will be very, very minimized in terms of sharing.
And I think this, in this situation, I'll tell you, this goes against the grain of kind of how we have built our school district over years about the notion of cooperation, teamwork. So in some sense, we're kind of reverting back, in some sense, to the days of old when each one of us are our own trapper keepers and all that good stuff, I guess, in some sense. We've been talking also about this notion of like keeping kids in cohorts together as much as possible. And I think meaning like self-contained as much as possible where we can do that. I think it works well for elementaries. I'm not really sure it's going to work that well for middle schools and high schools.
Yeah, and I think, that's something that, again, we're going to do as much as possible. And the real reason behind that is, should someone test positive or exhibit some symptoms, this is going to allow us to keep more kids in school, right? So as someone tests positive, perhaps the people that have been exposed to that are then impacted by that and may have to, if we don't contain that, have to go out for a certain amount of time based on the guidelines that have been given to us by TEA.
And I think that's the important thing to remember. Our mission, our goal that I've been talking about is to make sure that we can have many strings of consecutive school days as possible. Absolutely. With a lot of unknowns out there about this virus, what we want to do is have many days together, put together from day to day to day to day, and try to bring about a normalcy to our kids and our staff members in a safe way. And if we can achieve that, and the only way to achieve that is to follow, and all of us sort of, participate in this, the health screener, and of course, just making sure that we take care of the cleanliness and washing hands and all that good stuff during the day.
And we're going to build, I forgot to mention, kind of into the normal day, time to wash your hands, time to get sanitizer. We're going to have sanitizer in every classroom, for common spaces. So that's going to be a part of the daily schedule.
And there's so many more details to talk about, lunch schedule, recess schedules, and so on. So that's going to come in a future episode of the podcast. But let me kind of talk about the elephant in the room, and that's face coverings. So what's the general rule on this and just our thoughts on that so far?
Yeah, so I think generally we're looking at it in terms of the guidance and, as you'd mentioned, keeping school open. So we're not looking at any sort of other conversation that might be out there related to mask other than how can we utilize this guideline to keep our kids in school. And the guidance from TEA is very clear that they actually modified some state definitions of if you have a mask on and you're exposed to perhaps a positive case or something else, that having the mask actually allows you to stay in school. It's an added layer of protection that allows us to not have to send you home for some type of 14-day self-isolation period. So the mask actually really, based on how the guidelines have been dictated to us, actually is it's an added feature other than social distancing, which is going to be challenging at times. The mask is another kind of solution to making sure that we can keep the most kids in school. And so I think that's how we're looking at it in terms of this has been made available to us as a way to further protect students and keep them in school.
Yeah, I think once again, the goal is to have multiple strings of days put together consecutively to have school, to have a sense of routine and normalcy, then really the best way to do that is have a face covering. I know it's inconvenient at times here and there, and from a practical sense, I'm not really sure if I see a kid wearing that all day long, every minute of the day.
Sure.
Certainly, they may have to take it off here and there, but generally speaking, if they're with it pretty much all day, then it does create a way for us to say, hey, you can come to school on a day-to-day basis, even though there might be some positive cases here and there.
Yep, and I think those times where we know distance isn't going to be possible, I think it becomes key. And again, we're kind of following the governor's executive order that kind of dictates this to us. So I think we're certainly going to apply those guidelines.
And I'm going to be quite frank about this and candid. It's going to be hard for us to enforce or mandate or keep track of which kid is wearing, not wearing, and because we could be chasing that all day long, and I think that's where we don't want to spend our time. So we're going to need a lot of cooperation from our parents, especially if we want to have school and not cancel school.
Absolutely.
And so that's, in my opinion, that's how I'm looking at it. We want to do that. So one of the things that we're looking at, Steve, is potential of type of scenarios that parents are going to be coming forward with. So we're going to be asking parents here starting tomorrow about which way parents are thinking about. Because right now we need to know. We need to know, are you thinking about sending your kids remotely? Or, are you going to keep your kids at home and do a remote? Or are you going to go ahead and basically send their kids for on campus? Now, earlier in June, when we did a survey, June 8th was when we finished that. We had over 6,000 people, parents committed to that survey. And at that time, Steve, 80% of our parents said they're going to send their kids to school. 20% were going to stay home for all sorts of reasons, health reasons, remotely. And that was true with every grade level. Now, our strength and conditioning numbers, we have had pretty good numbers of kids coming to our strength and conditioning camps. So I don't know if that's a good indication of something or another. But we're looking at 4 different ranges potentially of scenarios. So one scenario is really hypothetically all kids staying home remotely. They're just saying, hey, we're all going to stay on their own as a choice. And if they did that, then in some sense, it would be actually kind of easy for us from a staffing position because we're able to, just have every teacher be a remote teacher in many ways. The other situation is, let's say that somewhere around 20% or greater decide to be remote, and then 80% attend school. And if that were to be the case, then in many ways, it almost helps us because then we can really social distance better if we have less kids physically here, more at home. And then obviously we can also help out with the teaching situation in some sense. That's right. The worst situation is, I think, if we have somewhere around 10% or less deciding to stay remote and 90% coming to school on campus, then it really makes it really difficult for us from a management perspective because we have to now figure out how to social distance with a whole bunch of kids, right? And of course, with 10% or less remote, that means we may not be able to do the best remote teaching opportunity here and there from a staffing position. But we will obviously have to do synchronous live instruction quite a bit. And then, of course, the other range of extreme is all kids coming to school, which means, wow, that's great as an educator because we want to see our kids. We think that's the best way to learn, be on campus, on face to face. But in many ways, that's going to be as we just talked about here with Joe, just managing that with all those kids. That would be the toughest one from a health perspective. So you're going to be sending out this information here, right?
Yeah. So we got some information that we got to gather from our parents. And we'll be doing that this week. We're going to be sending out a survey, and where we're just going to ask parents really one question: what mode of instruction are you going to choose for your child? Are you going to choose to send them to on campus, or are you going to choose to send them to remote learning and have them stay at home?
Now, so it's really a simple question.
Yeah, it's really, and when you get the survey, Your kids will be listed there on the survey. Now, we'll make a point that, when you register your kids, sometimes you might put one child with one parent and another child with another parent as far as their email address goes. So I do want to ask parents to kind of be on the lookout if you use two different email addresses to communicate with the district, to look at both of those, because you might find a child with each of those addresses. But aside from that, it's really one question. And I think what's really important for parents to know is that this is not a binding decision for the remainder of the school year. This is something that we need to plan for now. As you mentioned, we have 4 scenarios. And all 4 of those scenarios, particularly if we have more than 20% or around 10%, there's some planning that goes in place on our part. And so if we can get this information now and begin our planning process, we're going to come back August 11th, that's 2 weeks before the start of school, and come back and ask parents to make that final decision.
Yeah, so almost like a verbal commitment now and a final commitment later. Yeah. Really a pre-commitment and a final commitment. So we just want parents we just want to know what you're thinking at this point.
Yeah, and it doesn't have, and we know, since last week, we've probably received a couple hundred questions about what on-campus learning is going to look like, what remote learning is going to look like. And we'll talk about this later, about some information we're going to be putting on our website. And we'll answer a lot of these questions. Now, I'm going to have an answer to every single one of them. But I encourage parents, even if they don't have every single question answered, to still make some sort of decision one way where they kind of lean towards. I understand that, you might decide, I'm kind of leaning towards remote learning, but I still have some questions. That's okay. Go ahead and choose it. Don't wait to get every question answered, because we might run out of time before then, because we're going to have this open until next Tuesday. So go ahead and make that choice where you kind of feel you're leaning toward. And as we talk to parents, a lot of parents are kind of already know that gut of where they're going to go. And so that's what we want to hear.
And I want everybody to know that it's a 9-week commitment at a time.
Right.
So it's a grading. So you're not committing for the rest of your life for your child, but it's for the first 9 weeks. We'll probably ask that question again for the second 9 weeks and so on. So each grading period, you could go ahead and that helps us from a stabilization of the grading processes and just scheduling for student schedules, and that will be the way to go. So we're going to be asking this information here pretty soon, and information about all of this is available in the Comal Parent Resource Center, which is a web portal that we're designing for parents only for Comal Independent School District. So please look out for that. But once we get this information, we'll know better how we might plan going forward. So we've got a lot of details to work through. And I know there's a lot of questions out there, but once again, we're methodically trying to address some of these issues. Hopefully these podcasts are helping out. They'll be posted here soon. But I appreciate you guys being here. And parents, look for those email asking for the choice of right now, which way we're thinking about right now. Pre-commit information, so look for those emails. Now, in the future podcast, we're going to talk about extracurricular activities. We're going to talk more into health guidelines, what a day looks like, what a potential schedule may look like. So there's a lot more detailed topics coming up on these podcasts. And once again, we appreciate you guys joining me. Thanks very much for those of you in the studio with me. You've been listening to Comal ISD Radio. Join us next week as we talk about all those issues related to COVID-19 and reopening of 2021 launch. Thanks very much.